Good evening and welcome to Business Today on Channel I. On this program, we talk about business, entrepreneurship and many insightful topics with high-profile individuals. Keep tuning in to today's episode as well while we discuss business today. Today we have with us the Director and CEO of the Climate and Conservation Consortium. And to know more about who this individual is, let's take a look at the character profile.
Sanith is the Director and Chief Executive Officer of the Climate and Conservation Consortium, formerly known as the Carbon Consulting Company. Starting his career in corporate law before spending over a decade in marketing communication and strategic planning with international agency networks, Sanith took over the helm of the newly established environmental consultancy 11 years ago. He holds an MBA from the Postgraduate Institute of Management of the University of Sri Javadanapura and also has had his sustainability leadership training at Harvard University. CCC has been acknowledged as the pioneer in sustainability advisory space in Sri Lanka. CCC was acknowledged as the best provider of environment solutions in the Middle East, Asia by the World Leadership Federation at their International Awards ceremony in Dubai and was ranked number 1 by Insight Success magazine on its list of the 10 groundbreaking companies to watch in South Asia. Under Sanith's leadership, CCC has achieved many regional landmarks. Sanith's achievements led to him being awarded the Global CSR Leadership Award in 2017. He was inducted into the Global Climate Leadership Corps by former US Vice President Al Gore and Fiction as a lead mentor for the global training sessions the previous year. He is also the co-founder and managing director of the digital media and design thinking company Altered Experience.
Sanith, Wijeyeratne. Good evening and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
All right, so to start off the questionnaire, what exactly does the Carbon Consulting Company do? What is its role in today's society?
Well, we were set up as essentially a profit for a purpose company to kind of inspire companies to change. So when we started business just 12 years ago, the concept of sustainability was still new. People hadn't heard really of the term of a carbon footprint, what it means, why they should do it. So we wanted to be that catalyst to bring these conversations into corporate boardrooms, to show them the direction of change, give them the tools to help them change, so that we could have better, greener, cleaner corporates, not only in Sri Lanka but in the South Asian region. And that's what we wanted to do, and that's what we have been doing ever since.
Great. Now, I've heard of the term carbon neutrality. Just tell me a bit more about this topic.
Okay, so when we say carbon, we really mean greenhouse gases. Greenhouse gases, there's a whole bunch of gases, hydrofluorocarbons and a few others. But the most common one, the most well-known one is carbon dioxide. So people call it carbon footprint. So when we say we measure carbon footprint, essentially what we mean is we are looking at the sum total of the greenhouse gases that an organization would emit in the scope of its operations. Now, all these gases go out into the atmosphere. So when you drive a car, the gas is gone. You can't really stop it, can you? Carbon neutrality is a concept by which companies who measure their carbon emissions, the unavoidable carbon emissions, take activities to reduce and then to completely take out the same amount of carbon that they have emitted. So if you have emitted, let's say 100 tons of greenhouse gases, you either on your own or through somebody else fund a project to take out the same amount of greenhouse gases. So if you have emitted 100 tons, if you've extracted and taken out and sequestered 100 tons, you achieve what is called carbon neutrality.
Okay.
Carbon neutrality doesn't mean not having a carbon footprint, because at this point of time we can't really not have a carbon footprint. You have a certain amount of unavoidable emissions. So what carbon neutrality does is to take the minimum unavoidable emissions that a company has to emit, and a company that offsets them, completely reduces that same amount, is termed as carbon neutral.
All right. Now, how serious is climate change and carbon emissions?
Well, if you look at today's news, UK is going through a massive drought. They have their fields are on fire. I was in London 2 weeks ago on some work, and when I landed, they had the hottest day ever, which was 40 degrees in London. You know, it's hotter than Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
It was so hot that some of their houses caught fire in London. So the London Fire Brigade was busier 2 weeks ago than they have ever been since World War II. You know, and those fires are linked directly to the drought and you know, the sort of dangerous situation that the entire region is in. It's all dry, and that's a result of climate change. So we can see today, I mean, 12 years ago when we started in this company, people were still challenging the fact that climate change existed. You know, today nobody is going to challenge it, because we are seeing the evidence today. It is impacting not only our day-to-day lives, but the lives of everybody around the globe. So it's very serious, and we need to take really concrete action today.
Right, and it's pretty obvious that some of these global companies have a big effect and a big impact on the environment. Are there any measures that global companies are taking to reduce the impact on the environment?
I think the biggest shift that we are seeing is companies are moving very strongly towards renewable energy.
Okay.
That's one of the biggest and the most drastic steps that anyone can take, is to move your energy consumption from fossil fuel based, you know, coal and oil, to renewable based, you know, hydro, wind, solar power. Currently, today, renewable energies are the cheapest form of energy anywhere in the world, and everywhere worldwide, people are moving as en masse. You have governments, you have companies moving to consume only renewable energy. The exception is Sri Lanka, where we are still embracing fossil fuels. We are still only using you know, oil and diesel to generate our power. We have some hydro, of course, but we are not moving fast enough or quickly enough into the realm of renewable energy.
Why do you think that is?
Now, that's a very controversial topic,
Okay.
and I have at various other forums made my views very clear.
Okay.
I think, and perhaps this is not the forum in which to debate this whole issue.
All right.
But let me just lay out the facts. The facts are that every country worldwide, particularly, is moving in this direction of renewable energy. In many countries, in the US, in India, the projects in the pipeline are massive. You know, solar power, wind power. They say that I think the projected wind power daily could solve the entire energy for the world for a year or something like that. You know, there are some figures like that.
Right.
But essentially, it means that we have this vast, you know, untapped resource, and it's free. You know, it's unlimited virtually. You know, sunlight, wind, which we are not harnessing. Every other country in the world is doing it very successfully. They have declared goals of moving to complete renewable energy by 2020, 2030, 2050, except Sri Lanka, where we seem to be embracing an archaic, you know, 40-year-old model. And the excuses that are brought forth are a huge, you know, oh, the network can't support it, you know, our infrastructure is too old, you know, we can't. Well, what have the authorities been doing for the last 30, 40 years, you know, sitting on this? I mean, there are, again, I don't want to speculate, and then you can infer from what I'm saying why people are not moving from this.
Okay.
But I mean, we are not, the country desperately needs to move into a high level of renewable energy. If, I mean, for example, if we had less dependence on oil, this current fuel crisis would not have happened, because we are not dependent on foreign exchange going out of the country. It makes so much practical business, economic sense, yet as a country we haven't done it. So I think the biggest thing that we can do is definitely move in that area. The second thing that very large, you know, global giants are now doing is they are actively measuring the carbon emissions of their operations. You know, their supply chains, their distributions, their shops, their networks. They are also increasingly tracking the carbon footprint of their products. We work with a lot of apparel sector companies here in Sri Lanka, and increasingly a lot of the global brands want to know that, if you're making a tie, let's say, what is the carbon emission associated with the production of that tie?
Okay.
And more companies are seriously looking at that, and that's, I think, a very good indicator for the future, because only when you start looking at that can you start understanding how you can reduce it.
Okay.
And that's important. So those are the things that bigger global brands are doing. We're not seeing the same enthusiasm with the local brands.
Okay.
Local companies, local conglomerates are still not fully there. They're doing it much better than they were, but they're still not doing it with the conviction. They're doing it with still a tick box exercise for a lot of them. So.
All right. Now, the company recently announced a new corporate identity known as the Climate and Conservation Consortium.
Right.
Tell us about this change.
So, we've been working for the last 12 years now in the region, and we now have clients in several countries in South Asia, a couple in Europe, UK, Sweden, one or two in the US, and so forth. So, in this time, we, by design, we didn't try to do everything. We tried to focus on very strongly on a sort of a core area, and I think mainly we were known for our work in the space of carbon emissions, and I think we got reasonably good at doing that. So we now really understand how we can track carbon emissions and help clients to reduce it, advise them on carbon neutrality, and we've been doing that, I think, with 100+ clients over these years.
Okay.
But our board at a meeting felt that we should now, because we've established ourselves, we should now really expand the remit of the company to see what other challenges we can start addressing, given our track record and given the expertise we managed to build up over the years. So we decided to look at some of the wider impacts of climate change, particularly how they impact the humanitarian side of things, how we can try to combat social climate impacts. There's a huge movement towards climate justice.
Okay.
Because worldwide, the poorest people are the ones who are feeling the effects of climate change the most. So we wanted to start trying, and I'm not going to say we are going to solve the problem, obviously, but we are going to try to look at a broader angle. We also wanted to expand our activities in the conservation area. We have been working on some small reforestation projects here in Sri Lanka. We've been working with very large reforestation projects in Laos and Myanmar, 100 million trees, and we've helped them to register for carbon credits. But Sri Lanka hasn't really taken off in that. Today in Sri Lanka, tree planting is done by a lot of companies. And I say this to everybody: just because you plant a tree today doesn't mean you have solved the world's problems. A plant this size doesn't do anything. You have to grow it for 20 years, look after it. So people, when I talk to people, I say, don't do tree planting. And that way, why do you don't do tree planting? I said, no, you have to look after trees. You have to grow them and nurture them. You don't just plant them. The moment you say tree planting, people plant something and leave. So we wanted to start stimulating some of those conversations to see whether we can advise and be part of projects that actually look at long-term conservation solutions. So with all this, with the expanded remit of addressing other aspects of climate change, we're looking at bigger ways of conservation. We started looking for a change of name, and then climate and conservation came together. Okay. The third word, consortium, is really because we've brought together a couple of very good partners and members of a consortium. We have another company called the Conservation Carbon Company, which we work hand in hand together. We've also the Munasinghe Institute of Development, that is founded by our chairperson, Professor Munasinghe. So we brought some of these people together in a consortium of bodies to have everybody's expertise added into the pool. I think we've started a digital agency called Altered Experience, and that was one of the reasons was to start a design thinking based digital agency. But we also wanted to have a outfit that specialized in sustainability-led communications, and that was the reason for that founding. So we bring all these expertises together into one consortium of partners. So hence the name Climate Conservation Consortium. So that's how it came to be.
Okay. Now, I've also heard of the term greenwashing. I'm not sure if a lot of people know about it. Just let us know about that.
So greenwashing is something I like to talk about a lot because it's a huge prevalent problem today. So you heard the term whitewashing. You know? Whitewashing is when you take something and you essentially lie about it, or you exaggerate it, or you try to paint it in a different picture than what it is. So think of it from an environmental perspective. You know, greenwashing is the same thing. It's whitewashing for the environment. You know, it's where you do some small thing and pretend it's a very large, very significant thing. So very often, just an example, 8-10 years ago, I was at a very large factory, 4,000-5,000 people, and when I started saying, you know, you should work on countering your environmental impact, they said, no, we've done that. I said, what do you mean? No, we planted some. We did some tree planting last year, Environmental Day. I said, okay. So, how many trees did you plant? We did about 20 trees. Okay. How many are alive now? We don't know. You know, who's looking after them? We don't know. But publicly, we are doing this tree planting. Therefore, we are environmentally, sound. We are green. That is greenwashing. A lot of companies try to do very minimalistic things but pretend it's a large thing. So that's one area. The other one is where you're actually fraudulently claiming to be, recyclable, you're prodding like eco-friendly, I'm a green product. What is a green product, So companies very often cannot substantiate their claims, right? And they've been doing it for years. Nobody's been stopping them till recently. So a recent example is there was a particular airline in the UK called Ryanair who had publicly said, we are the lowest carbon emitting airline in Europe.
Okay.
The advertising standards body in the UK called them out and said, you cannot substantiate what you're claiming. How are you claiming this? And they didn't have the answer. Their ads were banned. They had to withdraw everything because they were making claims that they could not substantiate. Now, increasingly we are seeing consumers calling out brands, calling out companies. I think in 2014 there was a very widely published list called the world's greenest brands.
Okay.
And the top 50 green brands, and it was done by I think Deloitte or Interbrand, I think, based on a very extensive questionnaire. And number 16 on that was a brand called Volkswagen. So Volkswagen was 16th greenest brand. Just 8-10 months later, it was found out that they were substantially lying about the emissions of their cars. Their cars were way worse in terms of pollution than they claim to be. So Volkswagen was fined, I think, about $1 billion for lying on the environmental metrics of their cars. But according to the list, they were one of the greenest. So this is the thing. Companies can very easily lie on their, environmental metrics, their impacts, because people haven't been sent to jail for it. For example, if you lie on your taxes, your director of finance goes to jail. If you lie on some of your conglomerate activities, maybe your CEO goes to jail. But if you lie on your environmental aspects, nobody goes to jail. So increasingly, I think people will start really examining this, and that's something that companies really need to look out for. So,
okay. Now, your methodology comprises of materiality, measure, manage, and mitigate. Would you mind elaborating on these?
Sure. And this is a process we adopted, 11-12 years ago.
Okay.
Because the concept of materiality is to really understand each company, each process impacts the environment in a different manner. Right? For example, a washing plant, has a huge impact on the water because they extract a lot of water, they use a lot of water, they dispose a lot of polluted water. So washing, drying plants. But a bank, for example, even though it's a big bank, doesn't really use a lot of water. They use water for the toilets and the taps, Now, there's no point in telling a bank to really look at how you measure your water footprint and so forth, because it's not really material to the operations of a bank. However, telling a washing factory, don't look at your water, look at only your energy, also is bad, because their biggest impact is really the water. So you have to first understand how material each different impacts are. Pick the ones that are most impactful to the planet and that are most relevant to your operation. So focus on getting that, the thing that impacts 80%, fix that before you fix the 20%.
Okay.
Start by identifying, focusing on that, then moving on to measuring. And here what we talk about is making sure that you measure these impacts according to the globally recognized most relevant protocols. There are, for example, carbon footprint is measured according to a standard called the greenhouse gas protocol, which is the worldwide, an accepted standard to measure this. Now, there's no point in trying to do it some other way. You have to make sure that you are globally compatible with, companies and countries across the world. So measure it according to the accepted protocols, and then implement a management system, because most often, and we encounter this very early in our years with the local corporates, they just want to measure it and just report it, forget about it. And we found that we had to almost by force get them to start implementing management systems to really manage the environmental impacts that they are creating. So you can't manage what you don't measure. So you have to measure that first, manage it in the long term, and then start looking at ways to mitigate the impacts. Because if you don't reduce it, if you look at any house, you have 25 light bulbs, maybe you can reduce 2 of that or 3 of that or 4 of that. You have to start by reducing what you can before you can then compensate for the unavoidable emissions. So measure, manage and mitigate. So that's how it works.
Great. Thank you so much. That was Mr. Sanith de Silva Wijeyeratne, the Director CEO of the Climate and Conservation Consortium. It's always good to have a fellow Peterite on the show. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Cheers.
All right. And that winds up today's episode of Business Today. Do join us next week as well. Till then, have a good night.